In 1978, a woman named Rosa Delgado set up a wooden cart on Calle República de Guatemala in Mexico City's Centro Histórico. She sold 6 things: chicharrones with lime, tepache from a clay pot, obleas with cajeta she spooned from a glass jar. She made 11 pesos a day. That cart is number 20 on this list. The obleas are number 15. And one drink on this list was so powerful that the government and beer companies spent decades trying to destroy it. That drink is number 1. These were not restaurant foods. These were the foods that built the barrios, fed the factory workers, and kept entire families alive on centavos. If any of this sounds like your childhood, make sure you subscribe. We are counting down 25 forgotten Mexican street foods that disappeared after the 1980s. Number 25, chicharrones preparados. Outside every school in Mexico, there was a vendor. You remember the sound. That crunch of a wheat flour cracker the size of your hand, doused in Valentina and fresh lime juice. That was the whole thing. No cabbage, no cueritos, no mayonnaise mountain on top. The original chicharrones preparados were simple: a puffed wheat cracker, red-hot sauce, and a squeeze of lime. They cost centavos. Every child in Mexico ate these walking out the school gate. The vendor was stationed there every single day like a permanent fixture of your education. You learned math inside. You learned street food outside. The loaded versions you see today with shredded jicama and cucumber and cream are a different food entirely. The original was about that first crunch, that hit of acid and heat, and the fact that it cost almost nothing. That was a rite of passage for Mexican school children, and it is mostly gone. Number 24, atole de pinole. Before there were coffee shops on every corner, there were atole vendors walking through the barrio at dawn. You could hear them calling out in a loud voice, atole de pinole, atole de chocolate. They carried clay pots the size of your torso. Pinole is roasted corn ground into flour, dissolved in water with piloncillo and cinnamon. The Aztecs used it in sacred ceremonies. The Tarahumara runners of Chihuahua sustained themselves on pinole during ultra-marathons across the Copper Canyon. That same ingredient was in a cup being sold on your street corner for centavos. The vendor's voice was an alarm clock for the entire neighborhood. You didn't need a watch, you needed ears. That voice is gone. What was once peasant food is gentrified and exclusive. Boutique cafes in Roma Norte charge 80 pesos for what a street vendor used to give you for 5. Number 23, gorditas de horno. The baked gordita is disappearing. Most people only know the fried version now, but the original gordita de horno was something different entirely. Masa dough mixed with rendered pork fat and chicharrón, baked on a comal without a single drop of oil. The chicharrón was inside the dough itself. In the 19th century, factory workers in Zacatecas and San Luis Potosi depended on gordita vendors for affordable meals. The smell of chicharrón baking into corn dough on a hot comal was unmistakable. You could smell it a block away, crispy on the outside, soft in the middle, sometimes filled with beans or nopales, but often eaten plain because the dough had enough flavor on its own. A few pesos bought you a meal that kept you working until sundown. The fried gordita took over because it is faster and cheaper to produce. But it isn't the same food. The baked version had a depth that frying cannot replicate. Number 22, trompadas. The name means punch, and the sweetness hit you like one. Trompadas were twisted brown sugar candy with peanuts, made right in front of you by vendors who worked hot-melted piloncillo with their bare hands. They twisted the caramel into shapes while children stood watching like it was street theater. The ingredients were simple: piloncillo and peanuts, sometimes shredded coconut. That was it. Part of a dying guild of artisanal candy makers who sold alongside caramuscas, coquetas, and palanquetas at every mercado in central Mexico. The simplicity of the ingredients connected to a time before processed sweets, before factory wrappers, before ingredient lists you need a chemistry degree to read. Just sugar and nuts, twisted by hand. You rarely see trompadas outside of traditional mercados today. And the vendors who knew how to twist hot caramel without burning their fingers are not training replacements. Number 21, cocadas. After Sunday Mass, the church atrium became a market. Nuns and families would set up tables and sell cocadas in 3 colors: white, brown with piloncillo, and pink. The bright colors on a wooden tray were impossible for a child to resist. Cocadas are baked coconut candy made with egg yolks and sugar, a recipe that came from the coastal states: Guerrero, Oaxaca, Colima, Jalisco. Every coastal family had their own secret recipe passed down through generations. The church atrium sale was a tradition that connected faith and food in a way that felt completely natural. You went to Mass, you bought cocadas. That was the rhythm of Sunday. The factory-produced versions in plastic wrappers are not cocadas. They are coconut-flavored candy made by machines. The real ones were made by hands that knew exactly how long to bake the coconut until it turned golden. That knowledge is fading. Number 20. Palanquetas. A vendor with a small wooden table at a street corner. On that table, stacks of golden peanut brittle bars catching the afternoon sun. That was a palanqueta vendor. Native to Jalisco, these bars were made from honey or piloncillo syrup and peanuts, formed into flat rectangles by hand. Boys would circulate through neighborhoods with trays strapped around their necks, selling them for centavos per bar. The satisfying crack when you broke a palanqueta in half was one of those sounds you never forget. The handmade versions had an uneven, rustic quality. Some bites were mostly peanut, others were mostly honey. No 2 bars were identical. That imperfection was the entire point. Factory versions are uniform and predictable. Every bite the same. But street food was never about consistency. It was about a man with a tray and a recipe his father taught him. And that man is harder to find every year. Number 19, 8. The word is simple, 2 letters, but the tradition behind it stretches from the Middle East through Spain and into every mercado in central Mexico. 8 is fruit paste: quince, guava, tejocote, mango, plum. Cooked with sugar until it sets into dense, vivid blocks. The classic pairing was ate con queso, fruit paste with a slice of fresh white cheese. That was a post-dinner treat in millions of Mexican homes. Grandmothers would make 8 from the fruit trees in their own yards. Guava from the backyard. Quince from the neighbor. Each region had its signature. Morelia in Michoacan was famous for guava ate. Puebla made every variety you could imagine. Here is the thing. The homemade versions tasted different from mercado versions, and both tasted different from the factory blocks wrapped in plastic that you find today. 3 generations of 8, each one further from the original. The yard, the mercado, the factory. That is the story of Mexican street food in 3 words. Number 18, mueganos. From Puebla, the city that gave Mexico half its best street foods. Mueganos are fried dough pieces clustered together and coated in piloncillo syrup flavored with anise. Sticky, sweet, and impossible to eat without getting honey on your fingers and your shirt and your face. The candy ambulantes who sold them would call regular customers marchante. That word alone carries a world of familiarity and respect between vendor and buyer. Mueganos have been around for over 100 years. Ambulantes calling mueganos through the streets of Puebla and Huamantla in Tlaxcala was a sound as reliable as church bells. The handmade versions are being replaced by factory-produced imitations sealed in plastic. Same name, different food entirely. The anise flavor in the handmade version came from real spice, not flavoring. The piloncillo was real, not corn syrup. When a marchante becomes a customer and a vendor becomes a brand, something important is lost. That is the difference between a street and a supply chain. Number 17, gaznates. The name translates to gullet, throat, because the shape is a tube you eat in one long swallow. Gaznates are an Oaxacan sweet from the colonial period. Thin fried dough rolled into a tube and filled with sweetened whipped cream, sometimes flavored with mezcal, dusted with powdered sugar. A best-selling snack at Oaxacan sweet stalls for generations, part of Oaxaca's rich dulces típicos tradition that also gave us chocolate de agua and tejate. The delicate handmade tubes require a skill that fewer people possess today. You have to fry the dough thin enough to be crisp, but not so thin that it shatters when you fill it. That balance took years to learn. The women who ran those sweet stalls in Oaxaca's markets passed the technique from mother to daughter. When that chain breaks, the technique goes with it. And for gaznates, that chain is breaking. Number 16, pepitorias. Bright wafers in every shade, pink, white, yellow. Sandwiched together with honey and rimmed with pumpkin seeds poking out from the edges. Pepitorias were one of those street candies that you bought with your eyes first. Vendors would display them in pyramids on their carts at the mercado, and the colors pulled you in before you even knew what they tasted like. The pumpkin seeds have pre-Hispanic roots. Pepitas were a Mesoamerican staple long before the Spanish arrived. A few centavos bought you one in the 1960s. Children would hold them up to the light and look through the translucent wafers like stained glass. That is the kind of memory that stays, not the taste, the light. One of many handmade street candies replaced by factory-produced sweets that come in bags instead of pyramids. Number 15, camotes de Puebla. If you visited Puebla, you brought back camotes. That was not a suggestion. That was the rule. Sweet potato cooked down with sugar and fruit essences into a thick paste, rolled into cylinders and wrapped in colorful wax paper. Each color was a different flavor. Pink for strawberry, yellow for pineapple, white for coconut, green for lemon. Buying them from vendors at the Puebla bus station was a travel tradition. You hadn't properly visited Puebla unless you returned home with a box. Calle de los Dulces in Puebla's historic center was an entire street dedicated to these sweets. The slightly grainy texture that no other candy replicated. That specific chew between soft and firm. Camotes de Puebla were the edible souvenir of an entire state. A few centavos per roll in the 1960s and 70s. The tradition is smaller today. The bus station vendors are fewer, but the memory of unwrapping that wax paper is still vivid for anyone who grew up making that trip. Number 14, caramuscas. In the colonial period, candy makers in Guanajuato started twisting hot caramel from piloncillo and butter into elongated shapes. Over time, the shapes evolved to look like mummies, not random. Guanajuato is home to the famous mummies, the preserved bodies displayed in the city's museum since the 1800s. The candy makers shaped their caramels to match. Charamuscas were sold at every market, feria, and street corner in central Mexico. The candy making was a family craft. Fathers taught sons, mothers taught daughters. Children would watch vendors twist the hot caramel into shapes, mesmerized by the skill required to work boiling sugar without flinching. Centavos per piece from a market stall. Today you find them mostly in Guanajuato's tourist areas. The tradition survives, but it has been pushed to the margins. Once a daily street food, now a souvenir. That transformation happened to almost everything on this list. Number 13, enchiladas callejeras. The rolled tortilla dipped in chili sauce was first described by Bernal Diaz del Castillo in 1557. The Aztecs called it chilapitzali, chili flute. They served it to the conquistadors in 1519. That means enchiladas have been street food for over 500 years. And for most of that history, they were made by a woman at a street stall with a comal, a pot of bubbling chili sauce, and crumbly queso fresco. The sight of her dipping tortillas in red sauce and rolling them around cheese or beans was one of the most common scenes in any Mexican plaza. Enchilada simply means dipped in chili, as basic as street food gets. A corn tortilla, homemade sauce, fresh cheese, raw onion, and cream. Centavos per enchilada from a plaza vendor. Today, enchiladas are primarily a restaurant dish with complicated sauces and $12 price tags. But you need to understand something about those original plaza vendors. They were not making enchiladas for tourists. They were feeding their neighbors. A woman at a comal was the entire supply chain. She bought the chilis at the same mercado where she sold the enchiladas. The tortillas came from her own hands or from the tortilleria around the corner. Every ingredient traveled less than a mile. Every transaction was face-to-face. That is a food economy that doesn't exist anymore. And when it disappeared, it took the street enchilada with it. 5 centuries of history. Gone not because the recipe was lost, but because the world it depended on was replaced. Number 12. Agua de chia. Before chia became a superfood trend in 2010, it was just an everyday Mexican drink that nobody outside of Mexico had heard of. Chia seeds were a key crop for the Aztecs, right alongside corn, beans, and amaranth. The recipe has only 4 ingredients: lime juice, chia seeds, sugar, and water. Soak the seeds until they turn gelatinous. Mix with lime and sugar. Serve cold. That was it. Sold from large glass vitroleros at mercado stalls, those barrel-shaped jars that displayed aguas frescas in a rainbow of colors. Horchata here, Jamaica there, agua de chia next to them. The gelatinous texture was either loved or hated by children. There was no middle ground. You were a chia kid or you weren't. Traditional producers like Casilda Aguas Regionales in Oaxaca still use clay pots to keep the drinks chilled, but the mercado stalls with the glass vitroleros are fewer every year. Number 11. Abuelas con cajeta. In 1967, Jose Ascension Medellin Martinez started a small operation in his home making thin wafers filled with cajeta, goat milk caramel, the specialty of Celaya, Guanajuato. Nobody else marketed obleas with cajeta in those years. His company became Las Sevillanas, but before the factory version, there was the street vendor version. A man with a glass jar full of cajeta, a stack of thin wafers, and a spoon. He spooned the cajeta onto a fresh wafer right in front of you. You pressed 2 wafers together and watched the caramel ooze out the sides. That moment of pressing and watching was half the experience. A few centavos per oblea in the 1970s. Celaya was the cajeta capital, and the distance between a man spooning cajeta from a glass jar on a street corner and a factory-sealed package on a supermarket shelf is the distance between a memory and a product. Number 10. Alegrias. The name means joy, and there is a reason for that. Alegrias are toasted amaranth seeds bound with honey syrup, decorated with nuts, raisins, or dried fruits. Beautiful golden discs sold by ambulantes who carried trays strapped around their necks, walking through every plaza in Mexico City. Amaranth was a sacred crop for the Aztecs, used in religious ceremonies. When the Spanish arrived, they banned amaranth cultivation because of its use in what they called pagan rituals. They tried to erase it, but indigenous communities kept growing it in secret. The crop survived colonization through quiet resistance. Xochimilco and Tulyahualco in Mexico City became traditional production centers. Alegrias from those neighborhoods were sold on every street, mostly found in tourist areas and specialty shops today. A sacred crop that survived the Spanish Empire, only to be pushed to the margins by modernization. That is a powerful irony. Number 9. Tlacoyos. The Great Tlatelolco Market, the largest marketplace in the pre-Columbian Americas, sold tlacoyos. Accounts describe them as tasty and conveniently portable. That was before the Spanish arrived. Thick masa dough formed into oval shapes, stuffed with fava beans, ground beans, chicharron, or requesón cheese, cooked on a comal over an anafre, a coal stove. That smoky flavor from the coals was the signature. Gas stoves don't produce it. The traditional tlacoyo was supposed to be consumed without any toppings except fresh salsa, just the stuffed masa and the heat of the salsa. That simplicity was the whole point. Blue corn versions were especially prized and are harder to find today. A worker's snack that cost almost nothing. One of the oldest street foods in the Americas, with a lineage stretching back thousands of years. And the version cooked over charcoal on an anafre, the one that tasted like the Tlatelolco market must have smelled, that version is fading. Number 8. Tacos de canasta. The bicycle taco vendor weaving through morning traffic in Mexico City. That image is burned into the memory of anyone who lived there before the 1990s. Tacos de canasta. Basket tacos. Sudados. Sweating tacos. The origin traces to the 1950s in San Vicente Xiloxochitla, a small town 10 kilometers southwest of Tlaxcala. Between 50 and 80% of families in that town still produce tacos de canasta today. That is an entire village economy built on one food. Corn tortillas filled with mashed potato, refried beans, or chicken in adobo, wrapped in blue plastic and cloth inside a wicker basket to keep them steamed. Slicked with lard to prevent sticking. The cheapest breakfast in Mexico City. A few centavos each in the 1970s. Factory workers and students depended on them. Here is what makes tacos de canasta different from everything else on this list. The story is not just about food. It is about what happens when farming stops feeding your family. The low profitability of agriculture in Tlaxcala forced the villagers of Xochitla to reinvent themselves as taqueros. They didn't choose street food as a career. They chose it as survival. An entire village transformed by economic necessity into a supply chain for Mexico City's breakfast. Fathers taught sons how to fill the tortillas. Mothers taught daughters how to wrap the baskets. The bicycles were handed down like inheritance, and every morning before dawn, men would ride those bicycles loaded with baskets weighing 20 or 30 kilos, pedaling through the dark to reach Mexico City by the time the factories opened. That was not a business plan. That was a family deciding to keep going. And when you bought a taco de canasta for a few centavos on your way to work, you were buying the end product of that decision. You were buying survival made portable. Number 7, pambazo. The name comes from pan baso, low-class bread. That tells you everything you need to know about who this food was made for. During the vice-regal period, dedicated bakeries called pambacherias existed specifically to make this bread. The pambazo is bread dipped and fried in red guajillo pepper sauce, filled with papas con chorizo, topped with lettuce, cream, cheese, and salsa. The deep red color from the guajillo sauce made it instantly recognizable from across the street, a few pesos at any antojito stand in Mexico City. The pambazo is harder to find today outside certain neighborhoods. The bread itself, the actual pambazo bread, is increasingly rare at bakeries. Without the bread, you cannot make the sandwich. And without the sandwich, you lose the name. And without the name, you lose the history of a food that was called low class by the people who never had to eat it and beloved by the people who did. Number 6, tepache, a fermented pineapple drink with pre-Columbian roots. The Nahuatl word tepiatl originally meant a drink made from raw corn given to those who are fainting. The recipe evolved to use pineapple rinds, piloncillo, cinnamon, and cloves, fermented for 2 to 3 days in clay pots or wooden barrels. Tepacherias were once common in every neighborhood. Vendors sold it from large barrels on street corners, served in clay mugs or clear plastic bags with a straw. Centavos per glass. Tepache is described today as an esoteric find even for Mexico City locals. And that is what stings about this entire list. Mexico City has gradually turned its back on traditional drinks and foods. With the arrival of multinational fast food chains in the 1980s, the dishes and brews that grandparents consumed started disappearing. The economic crisis of that decade made everything worse. Informal street vending expanded, but the traditional artisanal vendors were squeezed out by new regulations, new buildings, and shopping malls. The clay mug was replaced by the plastic bag. The plastic bag was replaced by nothing. An entire category of fermented street drinks alive for centuries, going quiet in a single generation. Tepache isn't just a drink. It is a measure of how much has been lost. When a city of 20 million people can no longer easily find a drink that was on every corner 40 years ago, that is not a trend. That is a collapse. Number 5, camotes and carrito, the sweet potato cart with the steam whistle. If you grew up in Mexico City before the 1980s, you remember that sound. A melancholy whistle created by steam escaping through a one-way valve in the chimney of an oven on wheels. The camotero would wheel through neighborhoods at dusk, and you could hear the whistle blocks away. That sound meant one thing: baked sweet potatoes topped with condensed milk, cajeta, or strawberry jam. Baked plantains alongside them, 1 to 2 pesos per camote in the 1970s. The cart itself was an engineering marvel. A working oven on wheels, fueled by wood, producing enough heat to bake sweet potatoes and enough steam to create a whistle that served as advertising. No signs, no shouting, just that whistle. In Irapuato, Guanajuato, there is reportedly only one camotero left. One person carrying an entire tradition. That whistle is one of the most iconic childhood memories for anyone who grew up in Mexico before modernization silenced it. And the silence is the thing people notice most. Number 4. Nieve de Garrafa, hand-cranked Mexican ice cream. Before electric machines, before factory freezers, there was a man paddling a metal bucket inside a larger barrel packed with ice and salt. That was Nieve de Garrafa. The tradition traces back to pre-Columbian times when Aztec emperors sent servants to the volcanoes Popocatépetl and Iztaccíhuatl to gather ice. By 1620, Leonardo Llanos became Mexico's first commercial ice cream maker. The Italian Garrafa method made production affordable for street vendors. Mamey, guanabana, mango, tuna, leche quemada, rompope. Flavors you won't find in any commercial freezer. Each neveria in the town plaza had its own secret recipes. The hand-cranking ritual was a neighborhood event. Children would gather around and watch the nevero work. A few pesos per cone in the 1970s. Oaxaca, Dolores Hidalgo, and Tepoztlan are still famous for traditional nieves, but the street vendor with the hand-cranked garrafa, the one who knew exactly when the mixture was ready by the feel of the paddle, that vendor is becoming a memory. Number 3. Torta ahogada, the drowned sandwich, invented by accident in the 1920s in Guadalajara. A street vendor named Luis de la Torre, known as El Güero, dropped a sandwich into a pot of spicy salsa at the corner of Calles 16 de Septiembre and Miguel Blanco, next to the Jardin de San Francisco. Instead of throwing it away, he served it, and a culinary icon was born. The birote salado, a hard, salty bread unique to Guadalajara, filled with carnitas, then drowned in a spicy chile de árbol and tomato sauce with vinegar and cumin. You ordered it media ahogada, half drowned, or bien ahogada, fully drowned. Eating it required standing over the vendor's counter because the salsa dripped everywhere. There was no clean way to eat a torta ahogada. That was part of the charm. A few pesos for a meal that burned your lips and filled your stomach. The original street-side experience, standing at El Güero's counter with salsa running down your wrists, is a different thing entirely from the sit-down restaurant version. The food survived. The experience did not. Number 2. Tamale Row pushcart tamales. In the 1870s, Mexican tamale workers were among the first street food vendors in Los Angeles. By the 1890s, tamale vendors dominated downtown LA from the old plaza near Olvera Street southwest toward 6th Street. By 1901, more than 100 tamale carts roamed Los Angeles, each paying $1 a month for a city license. An army of pushcarts and wagons setting up shop through what was known as Tamale Row. Corn masa filled with pork, chicken, or beef in red or green chili sauce, wrapped in corn husks, steamed in large buckets on horse-drawn wagons that became rolling kitchens. In 1897, the city council tried to ban tamale sales due to disturbances. They failed. But over the following decades, regulation after regulation chipped away at the tamale cart culture. Olvera Street was reconstructed in the 1930s as a theme park version of a Mexican marketplace. The authentic tamale cart culture, the one that fed working-class Angelinos for decades, was regulated out of existence. The criminalization of Mexican pushcart vendors in West Coast cities destroyed an entire food tradition. That was not modernization. That was erasure. Number 1. Pulque from the pulquerias, Mexico's oldest alcoholic drink. Fermented sap from the maguey plant, documented for over 1,000 years. The Aztecs considered pulque sacred, reserving it for priests, warriors, and the elderly. At the beginning of the 20th century, Mexico City had over 1,500 pulquerias. By 2012, only 72 remained. That decline was not natural. Beer companies ran decades-long smear campaigns claiming pulque was made with cow excrement. The government allied with beer companies to depict pulque as a crass, poor man's drink. As late as 1953, the states of Hidalgo and Tlaxcala obtained 30 to 50% of total revenues from pulque. That is how important it was. Curados, flavored pulque with guava, mango, pineapple, or oatmeal, were a few centavos per glass. The cheapest thing you could buy that connected you to 1,000 years of heritage, and it was nearly destroyed not by changing tastes, but by corporate greed and government complicity. Famous pulquerias like El Vasco in Mexico City are gone. The Museo del Pulque y las Pulquerías now preserves a history that used to be alive on every street corner. 1,500 pulquerias down to 72. That is not a decline. That is a demolition. Make one of these this week. Just one. The tepache or the agua de chia, the tlacoyos or the enchiladas callejeras. Go to a mercado and ask the oldest vendor what they remember. Ask your grandmother what her street looked like when the camote whistle blew at dusk. Cook one of these recipes in your kitchen and stand there while it cooks. Not at the couch, at the stove, the way it was done. Now, I am not a doctor or a dietitian. This is not medical advice. This is just looking at what used to exist on the streets of Mexico before the factories and the franchises and the regulations pushed it all to the margins. These foods were never just cheap. They were alive. They were a man with a tray of alegrias walking through a plaza, a woman dipping tortillas in bubbling chili sauce at her stall, a bicycle vendor weaving through traffic with a basket of tacos. That was a food culture built by hand, one vendor at a time. Tell me in the comments which of these you remember, which one your abuela made, which one you can still find in your neighborhood. And if you can't find any of them, that is exactly why this list exists. Because forgetting is easy, remembering takes effort, and these foods deserve the effort.